There is one take that I will always stand 10 toes down on. Grinding is inherently unfun. And not just that, its only real purpose is to serve as a means to arbitrarily fluff up the playtime of a given game. Donkey Kong Bananza, on the other hand, is the first game I can point to that actually succeeds in thoroughly solving this problem. I've been playing Donkey Kong Bananza for most of my waking hours, admittedly mostly off stream, since it released, and while I thought I said all I had to say about the game before even playing it in podcasts and various video essays leading up to its release, all of my playtime has led to an epiphany I didn't expect, and it's something that I hope game designers clue in on as well and can thereby lead to a better future for gaming overall. Not too dissimilar to what The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was able to accomplish. Donkey Kong Bananza is one of the most grindy games I have ever played. Usually that is and should be a death sentence for a game, but in this case, I and many others are actually enjoying that grind. This isn't a case of a new entry in a genre converting past naysayers. This isn't a group of a lot of people buying into a given franchise because they just love that grind to begin with. This is a case of a game being designed with the express intent to make everything you do about rewarding you for doing it in a satisfying way that drives you to want to continue forward, which is surprisingly rare for a hobby that is supposed to be steeped in leisure. The way I see it, a lot of games that fall into the grindy category typically do so because they lack the confidence that they can provide a satisfying experience that keeps players engaged while they're playing, and when they're not, they can't help but to think about playing more. Be it through providing enough friction to make the player feel a sense of meaning during their playthrough, or through providing enough content to justify their asking price for a base of consumers that increasingly is marrying dollars in to hours out. Many developers still have an arcade era mentality where if you can ride the line of being appealing enough for players to want to finish, hard enough to stop them from steamrolling, and conservative enough on content to save on development time and resources, the resulting games will be able to punch above their weight commercially. In the actual arcade era, this strategy was common because storage was obviously a lot more limited, and companies made their money by people dumping as many quarters into each game as possible to eventually beat the game, their high score, or their friends, which made sense at the time. After all, can't make much money on a game people can beat on one quarter, so you better make a game that will hinder them from beating it at any cost. The cost in question tended to be bad controls, wonky combat, clunky movement, unfair enemy design, that sort of thing. In 2025, this is a stupid way to think about game development because consumers buy the game in full up front. There's no real reason to develop games with this mindset anymore other than gaming's habit of, well, being a byproduct of creatures of habit. It's the way they do it because it's always been how they've done it. Nintendo has been the pioneer in bucking all of these conventions across many of their franchises. Donkey Kong Bananza is the latest blow to the establishment, as it were. And don't get it twisted, I know there's a contingent of people who find comfort in having a mindless, low-impact task to do. That's all well and good, but that in and of itself is not fun and shouldn't be prioritized over fun as if the two things need to be mutually exclusive. Admittedly, this balance is attempted frequently, but it's often mismanaged in two major ways. One, there are games that on their own merits are so fun that you may find yourself wanting to grind just as an excuse to spend more time in that game. That example doesn't magically mean grinding is the thing that is being enjoyed, but rather is a means to the end that is. And two, there are games that have the player breaking the intended flow of a given game to find more fun in things that usually don't really help you progress through it. And if they do, they tend to make later parts of the game design less impactful in various ways depending on the game's genre. These are the most common risks at play when designing a grindy game, and if we trace them to their roots, we'd find they originated as band-aids developers have landed on in the early days of video game development that have since become staples in gaming by way of that good old game of telephone. The biggest greatest of which being how and the reason why most video games police the way players earn rewards in games. And perhaps more importantly than that, how frequently those rewards should be happening. Rewarding players in video games has historically been treated by game developers like a non-renewable resource. The logic seems to be, obviously, a game needs to feel rewarding to be worth playing, but there better be a limit. You can't make a game feel too rewarding, because if you do that, the player may burn themselves out on all of the fun there is to be had in a given game. DK Bonanza, on the other hand, is entirely designed around rewarding the player as much as is humanly possible, and it's unafraid of the potential consequences because it has some pretty solid solutions to keep the player engaged and increasingly invested in forward momentum. The most bare bones explanation as to how Bonanza keeps the player on board is a lesson Nintendo learned with Super Mario 64. DK's base abilities are pure fun to just mess around with. There's a high chance that you will spend a significant portion of your opening hours with the game just smashing things because it's that satisfying to do. Before you get to any sort of goals or objectives, the game already has a hook in. On the topic of objectives though, the titular Banana MacGuffin is a satisfying reward on many fronts in its own right. The act of collecting Banandium gems from the moment you see one, the task you complete to obtain it, and the action you perform to close the deal all feel satisfying to do in the most monkey brain way imaginable. Again, it just feels good to smash things in the game, so it's only right that collecting the carrot on the stick is a carrot on the stick in its own right. The effect of collecting these Banandium gems then improves the way you physically engage with the game by way of various upgrades the player can choose. This then makes finding even more Banandium gems easier, more engaging, or whatever, depending on the given upgrade. In addition to that, there are 2.5 different forms of currency, namely gold, fossils, and Banandium chips respectively, that all follow the same gameplay loop individually, and they are greater together than the sum of their parts because finding one form of currency could very well result in you finding another. For example, you can earn gold by breaking high volumes of various materials when punching through the world, or you can find treasure chests that contain maps that lead you to various power-ups that help you in other ways by also simply smashing everything around you. The clothing you purchase with fossils in particular has been big for me. Relatively early on in my playthrough, I got the pants that make treasure appear more frequently, instantly leveled them up as high as I could, and thought I'd never look back, but have since found several more useful pieces depending on the moment. The same can be said for Pauline's outfit, as that too builds on DK's abilities, mostly through the Bonanza power-ups, but it's not limited to that, with the amiibo fit being a strong example of the direction they can go. On that topic, let's dig further into how all of this so thoroughly solves the problems of grindy games by giving some additional case study level examples. You know that feeling in games with any level of management that compels you to hoard every possible resource for fear that you may need it later? Having said that, how many times have you hoarded a given resource only for you to end up with way more of it than the game ever ends up requiring of you? Or maybe you were met with a semi-optional task that you didn't really feel like doing in the moment, but forced yourself to because that game would make it a pain, if not impossible, to backtrack and do it later. I know I have. In fact, I assumed I would encounter something similar to that in Donkey Kong Bonanza itself. I assumed from jump that I should be a bit more reserved in terms of how I balance time spent smashing everything around me, purely for the fun of it, with progressing through the story. If this game existed when I was a child, I would literally spend hours just doing this. Like just punching, because I did that Mario 64. I just jumped and climbed the trees for hours. All right, I get the bananas. Because in most games, not doing the chores in between having whatever fun there is to be had will lead to a lopsided experience where at some point you'll be faced with a laundry list of tedious things you need to do to get through the game. Turns out, Bonanza's design encourages you to just do what you likely naturally want to do anyway. It knows it's fun to break everything. So instead of just letting that be a distraction with varying degrees of importance, the entire game is designed around pushing you to do exactly that. It genuinely feels like a kid in the candy store moment, but instead of getting sick after, the game allows you to have all the candy you want without any drawbacks. And the biggest contributing factor to the lack of drawbacks isn't that Bonanza doesn't have side quests and content that in other games frequently comes off as fluff. There's a lot to collect, and there's a lot the game requires of you, which is a good thing, even in games that approach it poorly. What stops it from becoming like those bad examples, though, is that it allows you to take the unnecessary guesswork out of collecting when time comes to do so. Every Banandium gem is accounted for on an ordered list that's specific to the sublayer you find it on. And the best part, you can know exactly where to go via digging, smashing, or purchasing maps that lead you to each individual Banandium gem and fossil in the game. Some people associate the aimless scavenger hunts found in grindy games as a part of the challenge, and I vehemently disagree. The challenge in any game should be using the mechanics you're given to clear obstacles. It shouldn't be to have enough patience to aimlessly wander in hopes that you find a needle in a haystack. And I hate the overuse of this word when talking about game development because gamers are allergic to nuance, but trust me when I say that is lazy game design. The sense of relief you may feel from ending an annoying and/or frustrating portion of a game shouldn't be used as a substitute for feeling accomplished from clearing a well-designed obstacle of some kind. And Bonanza clearly feels the same way because nothing in the game stays hidden if the player doesn't want it to. And even with this open book approach, there's still so much playtime potential in the game. There's challenging combat moments, there's puzzling physics and destruction-based moments, there's platforming challenges, and more. This is a roughly 30-hour long game, and I can't think of a single hour that felt like I was doing anything I didn't choose to do. Much like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Bonanza has its shrine equivalent called Ancient Ruins, and just like those games, there are some standalone categories that are reused within them, like the Donkey Kong Country throwbacks or combat challenges, but unlike shrines, there aren't any reused ideas. Every ancient ruin either introduces or meaningfully builds on mechanics in the game. They vary in difficulty, to be sure, and some are easy, to be clear, but all of them feel purposeful, whereas many Zelda shrines felt like they were placed there solely to fill out the world. On top of that, Bonanza also incorporates challenges within the sandbox levels themselves that feel inspired by the Cappy List sections in Mario Odyssey that task the player with finding ways to clear blocks in the world in a set amount of time. None of this is new in a vacuum, but all of it feels refined and excels in the current gaming landscape. Bonanza does a phenomenal job at throwing new ideas at the player every chance it gets in a way that I strongly feel is better experienced firsthand. So I won't go into detail on the specifics. I'll just say I thought I understood what the game had to offer at 10 hours in. The following 25 or so that it took me to actually roll credits thoroughly proved me wrong in the best way imaginable. Much like the synergy I spoke to in regards to the collectibles in the game, the way the gameplay mechanics interact with and compound on each other in the level design is so thorough and exceedingly clever. A lot of which felt to me like the development team was deeply inspired by Breath of the Wild's chemistry engine, which, if you know me, is a massive green flag. I audibly exclaimed, "This game is so smart," several times during my playthrough, and having now gotten to the post game, I'm still seeing new ideas both big and small that underscore that exclamation. Don't even get me started on all the developments happening in the speedrunning community for the game. It's just another example of how similar this game is to Breath of the Wild in regards to emergent gameplay, and that is the highest compliment a game in the modern era could be paid. Donkey Kong Bananza is a game that truly embraces being a game like few do in 2025. Everything it does is in service of fun. I hate the fact that that is impressive. I wish every game cared this much about providing fun, but here we are. Obviously, games need stakes. Games need friction. Games benefit from challenge. None of these things should supersede fun. They are all things that are important to have represented in a game, as they can all equate to your time with a game feeling meaningful. What most games are missing the mark on, though, is treating it as an imperative that all of those things should be fun. Making having fun feel meaningful is possible. It shouldn't be a roundabout thing. I shouldn't need to acquire a taste for it. If it's not innate, go back to the drawing board. Donkey Kong Bonanza is proof that you can balance the two without any mental gymnastics, and I hope game devs and publishers across the industry, regardless of genre, take note. On the topic of developers taking note, check out the last Donkey Kong Bonanza video I made on Nintendo's mastery of franchise support. Thank you to paid members over at shop.watchredirect.com like Trev L. Steinberg for making this video possible. Hit the link in the description to join them in the credits of every video and in receiving both physical and digital perks.